The crystal chandelier above the poker table cast fractured light across Daniel Hayes' worn jacket as he stood at the entrance of the Meridian Club, one of Seattle's most exclusive private lounges. His hands, calloused from years of construction work, gripped the strap of his daughter's medical folder like it was the only thing tethering him to hope. The security guard had already looked him up and down twice, the kind of look that measured a man's worth by the shine of his shoes and the cut of his coat. Daniel had neither. What he did have was a daughter lying in a hospital bed 12 blocks away, and a woman inside this gilded room who had just made him an offer that sounded more like a dare than a lifeline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her name was Vanessa Caldwell, and 3 hours ago, she had walked past him in the hospital corridor while he sat slumped against the wall outside the pediatric ICU. She had paused, turned back, and asked him a single question that changed everything. "Are you the father of the little girl with the heart condition?" He had nodded, too exhausted to wonder why a woman in a $10,000 suit would care. She had handed him a business card embossed with gold lettering and told him to meet her at the Meridian Club at 8 o'clock sharp. "If you can prove you're more than what you look like," she had said, "I'll pay for everything your daughter needs. Every surgery, every treatment, every chance at life. But you'll have to earn it." And then she had walked away, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown he couldn't stop. Daniel had spent the last 2 years watching his world collapse one piece at a time. It started the night his wife Emma didn't come home from her shift at the diner, the night a drunk driver ran a red light and turned his marriage into a memory. 6 months after her funeral, his daughter Lily started complaining about chest pains. The doctors had used words like congenital defect and surgical intervention and critical timeline, but what Daniel heard was "we need money you don't have." He had sold everything that wasn't nailed down. The house went first, then the truck, then the tools that had been his father's before they were his. He moved Lily and himself into a studio apartment above a laundromat where the walls shook every time someone started a dryer. He took every shift he could find, sometimes working 18 hours straight, coming home with concrete dust in his lungs and paint under his fingernails. But it was never enough. The medical bills kept coming like waves, each one higher than the last, and he was drowning. Tonight, standing outside this palace of marble and money, Daniel realized he had 2 choices. He could turn around, go back to that hospital room, and watch his daughter's light fade a little more each day until there was nothing left but the sound of machines keeping her alive. Or he could walk through those doors and face whatever test this stranger had prepared for him. He chose the doors. The interior of the Meridian Club looked like something out of a movie Daniel couldn't afford to watch. Dark wood paneling climbed the walls, and oil paintings of men in military uniforms stared down at him with dead eyes that seemed to judge his presence. A fireplace crackled in the corner even though it was barely autumn, and the air smelled like aged whiskey and old money. But it was the poker table in the center of the room that held his attention. 6 people sat around it, their chips stacked in perfect towers, their expressions carved from the same expensive stone as the building itself. And at the head of the table, shuffling cards with the kind of practiced ease that spoke of countless games, was Vanessa Caldwell. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not pity, but curiosity, like Daniel was a puzzle she hadn't quite figured out yet. She gestured to the empty chair across from her with one manicured hand. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and her voice carried across the room like she owned every inch of air in it. "I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure you would." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over his scuffed boots and faded jeans. "Most people in your position would have assumed this was a joke." Daniel pulled out the chair and sat down, feeling the weight of every eye in the room land on him like physical things. "It's not a joke to me," he said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "My daughter needs help. If you're serious about your offer, then I'm here to do whatever it takes." A man to his left, silver-haired and wearing a watch that probably cost more than Daniel's entire year's salary, let out a short laugh. "Vanessa, darling," he said, "where did you find this one? Did you pull him off a construction site?" The table erupted in polite laughter, the kind that wasn't meant to be funny but to remind everyone of their place in the hierarchy. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept his face blank. He had learned a long time ago that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Vanessa silenced them with a look. "Mr. Hayes," she said, dealing cards with swift, precise movements, "here are the rules. We're playing Texas Hold'em. You'll start with the same stack as everyone else at this table." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. If you can win more hands than you lose over the next 2 hours, if you can prove that you have the skill, the nerve, and the intelligence to compete at this level, then I'll wire the funds for your daughter's treatment tonight. Every penny. No strings attached. But if you lose, she paused, her dark eyes locking with his, then you walk out of here with nothing, and you never contact me again. Do you understand? Daniel understood more than she realized. He understood that this wasn't really about poker. It was about whether someone like him, someone who smelled like sweat and desperation, could sit at a table with people who had never known what it meant to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. It was about whether he could hold his own in a world that had spent his entire life telling him he didn't belong. He picked up his cards and looked at her. "I understand," he said. "Let's play." The first hand was a disaster. Daniel had a pair of sixes, nothing special, and he folded when the silver-haired man raised aggressively. The man showed his cards afterward, a bluff, just 2 high cards with nothing connecting them, and the table laughed again. The woman next to him, dripping in diamonds and disdain, leaned forward. "This is going to be a short evening," she murmured to no one in particular. "I should have left after cocktails." But Daniel didn't react. He couldn't. Because 7 years ago, before Emma died, before Lily got sick, before the world decided to test exactly how much one man could endure, he had been someone else entirely. He had been a different version of Daniel Hayes, one who spent 3 years in Las Vegas working security at the Bellagio Casino. He had watched thousands of poker games from behind the velvet ropes, studied the professionals, learned to read the microscopic tells that separated amateurs from sharks. He had even played in backroom games with dealers and pit bosses, honing skills he thought he'd never need again. When Emma got pregnant and they decided to move back to Seattle to be near her family, he had walked away from all of it. He had chosen the quiet life, the stable life, the life of a husband and father. But those skills, buried under years of diapers and parent-teacher conferences and bedtime stories, were still there. Waiting. And now, sitting at this table with everything he loved on the line, he felt them waking up. The second hand, Daniel played cautiously. A pair of jacks, and he called the minimum bet, watching how each player moved, how they breathed, how they arranged their chips. The silver-haired man, his name was Richard, scratched his ear every time he had a strong hand. The diamond woman, Catherine, blinked rapidly when she was bluffing. A younger guy at the end, corporate type with slicked back hair, always checked his cards twice when he was uncertain. These were the threads Daniel needed to pull. By the 5th hand, he had won his first pot. Nothing major, just a small victory with 3 of a kind, but he saw Vanessa's eyebrow raise a fraction of an inch. The laughter had stopped. The 6th hand, Daniel bluffed Richard out of a significant pot with nothing but a high card and a steady gaze. Richard threw his cards down in frustration. "Lucky," he muttered, but there was doubt in his voice now. The room had changed. The fire still crackled, the chandelier still sparkled, but the atmosphere had shifted from amusement to attention. Daniel wasn't the joke anymore. He was a variable they hadn't accounted for. And as the hands continued, as he read their tells and calculated odds and remembered everything he had learned in those Vegas back rooms, he began to win. Not every hand, that would have been suspicious, but enough. Steadily. Methodically. His chip stack grew while theirs diminished. An hour into the game, Daniel was up significantly. Catherine had already excused herself, her diamond necklace catching the light as she swept out of the room with wounded pride. 2 others followed shortly after, their losses too steep to continue. That left Daniel, Vanessa, Richard, and the young corporate player whose name he had learned was Marcus. The stakes had risen. So had the tension. Vanessa dealt the next hand herself, her movements precise and controlled. Daniel looked at his cards. Ace and King of Hearts. A strong starting hand, but dangerous if played poorly. The flop came down, and he saw it immediately. 10 of Hearts, Queen of Hearts, and a 3 of Clubs. He had 4 cards to a royal flush, 1 card away from the best possible hand in poker. But he also had nothing concrete yet. Just potential. Just hope wearing a different face. Richard bet heavily. Marcus folded immediately, sensing the danger. Vanessa studied Daniel across the table, her expression unreadable. She called Richard's bet and raised it higher. The pot was now large enough to change the game entirely. Daniel looked at his chips, did the math, and pushed them forward. All in. The words hung in the air like smoke. Richard's face went pale. He looked at his cards, at the pot, at Daniel, and then folded with a curse. But Vanessa, she smiled. A real smile this time, not the polite mask she had worn all evening. She called his bet, matching his all-in with chips that clinked like promises. "Show me," she said. The turn card came down. Jack of Hearts. Daniel's pulse hammered in his throat. He had a straight now, ace high, a guaranteed winning hand unless someone had a better straight or a flush. But more importantly, he had 1 card left, 1 chance at the royal flush. The river card, the final card, would decide everything. Not just this hand, but his daughter's future. The dealer revealed it slowly, and Daniel felt time stretch and compress simultaneously. 9 of Hearts. He had the flush. Ace high flush. But more than that, he had been 1 card away from the royal, and the fact that he had pushed all in on potential, on calculated risk, on the kind of courage that comes from having nothing left to lose, that meant something. Vanessa flipped her cards. She had 2 pairs, strong, but not strong enough. Not tonight. The room fell absolutely silent. Daniel had 1. Not just the hand, but the game, the challenge, the test that was never really about cards at all. He pulled the chips toward him with shaking hands, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something other than despair. He felt like maybe, just maybe, the universe hadn't completely forgotten about people like him. Vanessa Caldwell didn't move from her seat immediately. She sat there, her perfectly manicured fingers resting on the edge of the poker table, her eyes fixed on Daniel Hayes with an intensity that made the air between them feel electric. The other players had gone silent, their earlier mockery replaced by something closer to disbelief. Richard had pushed his chair back slightly, as if creating distance from what he'd just witnessed might somehow make it less real. Marcus had stopped fidgeting with his phone and was staring at Daniel like he was trying to decode a language he'd never learned. But it was Vanessa who held Daniel's attention, because behind that mask of composure, he could see the gears turning, reassessing, recalculating everything she thought she knew about the man sitting across from her. She reached for a crystal glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it down with deliberate care. "Impressive, Mr. Hayes," she said finally, her voice carrying none of the condescension it had held earlier. "Very impressive." She glanced at Richard, whose face had turned a shade somewhere between embarrassment and anger. "It seems we've all underestimated you tonight. That doesn't happen to me often." She paused, and Daniel watched as something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor that wealth and power had built around her. "Tell me something. Where did a construction worker learn to play poker like that?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He gathered the chips slowly, stacking them with the same methodical precision he'd used throughout the game, buying himself time to think. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in a version of himself he'd tried to leave behind, tangled with memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. But Vanessa had kept her end of the bargain, or at least she was about to, and he owed her honesty if nothing else. He looked up, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Vegas," he said simply. 7 years ago. I worked security at the Bellagio for 3 years. Watched more poker games than I can count, learned from some of the best players in the world without them ever knowing I was paying attention. When you spend that much time around cards, around people who make their living reading other people, you either learn or you get eaten alive. I learned. Richard let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff, Daniel couldn't tell which. So this whole blue-collar, desperate father routine was an act? He said, his voice dripping with accusation. You hustled us. You came in here pretending to be some nobody who didn't know us straight from a flush, and you took us for everything we had. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. It wasn't an act, he said, and there was steel beneath the exhaustion in his tone. I am a desperate father. My daughter is dying in a hospital 12 blocks from here because her heart is failing and I can't afford to fix it. I haven't played a hand of poker in 7 years because I gave all of that up when my wife got pregnant. I chose a different life, a quieter life, because that's what you do when you become a parent. You put your own dreams in a box and you focus on keeping your family safe and fed and happy. But life doesn't care about your plans. It takes what it wants and leaves you with the pieces. So no, Richard, this wasn't a hustle. This was survival. The room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the amused, dismissive quiet from before, but something heavier, more uncomfortable. Even Richard had the grace to look away, suddenly very interested in his empty glass. Marcus cleared his throat and stood up, mumbling something about needing to leave, and within moments he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that echoed in the vast space. Catherine had already vanished earlier, and now the remaining players began to drift away one by one, like ghosts retreating from a scene they no longer understood. Soon it was just Daniel and Vanessa, the fireplace crackling between long stretches of silence, the chandelier casting shadows that danced across the green felt of the poker table. Vanessa studied him for what felt like an eternity, her dark eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and began typing with quick, efficient movements. Daniel watched, his heart hammering against his ribs, wondering if she was about to tell him that the deal was off, that she'd changed her mind, that he'd won the game but lost the war. Instead, she turned the phone toward him. On the screen was a banking app, and there in the transfer section was an amount that made Daniel's vision blur. $250,000. Payable to Seattle Children's Hospital, account number already entered, patient name Lily Hayes, authorization code ready to send. All Vanessa had to do was press one button and his daughter's future would change. Everything would change. Daniel stared at the screen, unable to speak, unable to breathe, unable to process that after 2 years of drowning, someone had just thrown him a lifeline made of numbers and pixels and impossible hope. Before I send this, Vanessa said quietly, I want to tell you why I made you that offer in the hospital. Why I brought you here tonight. She set the phone down between them and leaned back in her chair, her expression softening in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. My daughter died 6 years ago. Leukemia. She was 8 years old, and we tried everything. Every treatment, every experimental drug, every doctor who promised us a miracle. But money can't buy miracles, Mr. Hayes. It can buy time, and hope, and comfort, but it can't always buy survival. When she died, I thought I would die too. I thought the grief would consume me entirely, that I'd simply stop existing because how could I continue in a world where she didn't? But I didn't die. I kept breathing, kept moving, kept building my empire because that's what people like me do. We bury our pain in work and ambition and the relentless pursuit of more. She paused, and Daniel saw the shimmer of tears in her eyes, tears she blinked away quickly as if ashamed of their existence. But sometimes, she continued, I see people in hospitals. People who are fighting the same fight I fought. And I test them. I know it sounds cruel, maybe it is cruel, but I need to know that they're strong enough to deserve what I'm about to give them. Not because I think suffering is noble, but because I've seen too many people crumble when life gets hard. I've seen too many parents give up, turn to substances or violence or simply disappear rather than face the reality of a sick child. So I test them. I push them. I humiliate them, I challenge them, I make them prove that they're made of something stronger than desperation. And you, Mr. Hayes, she picked up her phone again, her thumb hovering over the send button, you proved it. She pressed the button. The screen flashed confirmation, and just like that, Daniel's entire world shifted on its axis. Transfer complete. $250,000 sent to Seattle Children's Hospital for the exclusive treatment of patient Lily Hayes. He stared at the words until they blurred into meaningless shapes, until his eyes burned with tears he'd been holding back for months, maybe years. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself against the wave of relief and gratitude and sheer overwhelming emotion that crashed over him like a tsunami. "Thank you," he managed to say, and his voice cracked on the words. "Thank you. I don't know how to, I can't, there's no way I can ever repay you for this." Vanessa stood up, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. "You don't repay me," she said firmly. "You take care of your daughter. You be there for every surgery, every recovery, every milestone she reaches because of the chance you fought for tonight. You watch her grow up, graduate, fall in love, build her own life. And someday, when you see someone else drowning the way you were drowning, you throw them a lifeline too. That's how you repay me. Not with money or gratitude, but by being the kind of father your daughter deserves, and by remembering what it feels like to be on the edge of losing everything." She extended her hand across the table. "It was a pleasure playing with you tonight, Mr. Hayes. You're a better man than most who walk through these doors." Daniel stood on shaking legs and took her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike, but there was warmth there too, a connection forged in shared grief and unexpected understanding. As he turned to leave, his mind already racing ahead to the hospital, to Lily, to the conversation he'd have with her doctors about surgeries that were suddenly possible, Vanessa called out to him one last time. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and he turned back to see her standing by the fireplace, the flames casting orange light across her face. "Your wife. Emma. I'm sorry for your loss." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I want you to know that somewhere, somehow, she's proud of you. Proud of the father you've become, proud that you didn't give up even when giving up would have been easier. Don't forget that in the hard days ahead. Don't forget that you're not alone in this fight." Daniel nodded, unable to trust his voice, and walked out of the Meridian Club into the cool Seattle night. The city lights stretched out before him like a constellation of second chances, and for the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably a confirmation from the hospital that the funds had been received, that Lily's surgery could be scheduled, that the nightmare was finally ending. But he didn't check it yet. Instead, he stood there on the sidewalk, breathing in the night air, letting the reality of what had just happened sink into his bones. The walk to the hospital took 20 minutes, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind kept replaying the evening, the cards, the faces around the table, the moment when he'd pushed all his chips forward and bet everything on a hand that could have destroyed him. He thought about Vanessa's story, about her daughter who never got the chance Lily now had, about the strange and complicated way grief could transform people into either saints or monsters depending on which direction they chose to channel their pain. She had chosen to be a saint tonight, even if her methods were unconventional, even if her test had been brutal in its own way. She had given him more than money. She had given him validation, proof that he was strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough to save his daughter. The hospital lobby was nearly empty at this hour, just a few tired nurses at the desk and a janitor mopping floors with methodical boredom. Daniel took the elevator to the 4th floor, his heart pounding harder with each passing second. The pediatric ICU was quiet, most of the children asleep behind closed doors, their families either keeping vigil in bedside chairs or catching desperate moments of rest in the waiting room down the hall. Lily's room was at the end of the corridor, and through the small window in the door, he could see her tiny form beneath white sheets, monitors beeping softly in the dim light, keeping track of a heart that was trying so hard to keep beating. He pushed open the door as quietly as possible and stepped inside. Lily was asleep, her brown hair spread across the pillow like silk, her face peaceful in a way that broke his heart and filled it simultaneously. She looked so small, so fragile, so impossibly precious that Daniel had to grip the rail of her bed to keep himself upright. He reached out with one calloused hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his touch feather-light so as not to wake her. "Hey princess," he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him. "Daddy did it. Daddy won. You're going to get better now. You're going to have the surgery, and the doctors are going to fix your heart, and we're going to go home and you're going to run and play and live the life you deserve. I promise you, baby girl. I promise." A tear slid down his cheek, then another, and he didn't bother wiping them away. He'd held it together for so long, been strong for so many months while the world crumbled around him, and now, standing in this hospital room with his daughter sleeping peacefully and hope finally within reach, he allowed himself to break just a little. To feel the weight of everything he'd been carrying, and to let some of it go. Because tomorrow the doctors would come with schedules and plans and medical terminology he'd have to learn. Tomorrow he'd have to be strong again, be the rock Lily needed him to be. But tonight, just for tonight, he could be a father who cried tears of relief and gratitude and love so fierce it felt like it might consume him from the inside out. The night nurse came in to check vitals, saw Daniel standing there, and gave him a knowing smile. "You heard about the transfer," she said softly. "The whole floor is talking about it. It's a miracle, Mr. Hayes. A real miracle." She adjusted one of the monitors and made a note on her tablet. "Dr. Patel will be in first thing in the morning to discuss the surgery schedule. But everything looks good. Your daughter is stable, and now she has a real fighting chance." Daniel nodded, still unable to form words. The nurse patted his shoulder gently and left him alone with Lily, and he settled into the chair beside her bed, the same chair he'd spent countless nights in, watching her breathe, praying for miracles he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. But tonight was different. Tonight he wasn't praying for miracles. He was living inside one, and it felt like waking up from a nightmare into a world where impossible things could still happen if you fought hard enough, if you were brave enough, if you had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He thought about Vanessa again, about her challenge and her pain and the strange way their lives had intersected in a hospital corridor. He thought about Emma, about the life they'd planned together and the future that had been stolen from them by a drunk driver and cruel timing. He thought about Vegas, about the skills he'd learned and then abandoned, never imagining they'd one day save his daughter's life. And he thought about Lily, about the little girl who loved butterflies and strawberry ice cream and bedtime stories about princesses who saved themselves, about the daughter who had kept him alive through the darkest days of his life simply by continuing to exist, to hope, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. The city outside the window began to lighten, dawn creeping across the sky in shades of pink and gold. Daniel watched the sunrise through tired eyes, still holding Lily's small hand in his, still feeling the weight of poker chips in his pocket like talismans of a battle won. The world was waking up around them, nurses changing shifts, doctors making early rounds, life continuing its relentless forward march. But in this room, in this moment, time felt suspended, held in the space between yesterday's desperation and tomorrow's hope. Daniel Hayes had walked into the Meridian Club as a broken man with nothing left to lose. He had faced mockery and doubt and the weight of impossible odds. He had bet everything on a hand of cards and a lifetime of buried skills. And he had won. Not just the game, but the chance to watch his daughter grow up, to be the father Emma had always believed he could be, to prove that love and determination and sheer stubborn refusal to give up could still matter in a world that often felt designed to crush people like him. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. It was everything. The surgery was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 6 o'clock, 3 days after Daniel's encounter at the Meridian Club. 3 days that felt simultaneously like a lifetime and a single heartbeat. Dr. Patel had spent nearly an hour explaining the procedure to Daniel in language that oscillated between clinical precision and careful simplification, walking him through diagrams of hearts and valves and chambers that all looked like alien landscapes to someone whose expertise lay in lumber and nails rather than tissue and blood. The surgery would take approximately 8 hours. They would open Lily's chest, stop her heart temporarily while a machine took over the work of keeping her alive, repair the congenital defect that had been slowly killing her since birth, and then, if everything went according to plan, restart her heart and close her up. Simple, in the way that nothing involving your child's mortality could ever truly be simple. Daniel had listened to every word, asked every question he could think of, signed every form they put in front of him with hands that had finally stopped shaking. But beneath the practical concerns and medical terminology, beneath the statistics about success rates and recovery timelines, there was only one question that truly mattered, and it was the one question Dr. Patel couldn't definitively answer. Will she survive this? The doctor had been honest, which Daniel appreciated even as it terrified him. The surgery carries risks, he had said, his dark eyes kind but unflinching. But without it, your daughter has perhaps 6 months, maybe less. With it, she has the chance at a normal life. Those are the choices in front of you, Mr. Hayes. Certainty of decline, or the possibility of healing. Daniel had chosen possibility, because what else could a father do? The days leading up to the surgery had been strange, suspended between dread and something that almost felt like normalcy. The hospital staff, perhaps sensing the shift in Daniel's circumstances or maybe just responding to the tangible change in his demeanor, had been kinder, more patient. Nurses who had previously kept their interactions brief and professional now stopped to chat, to ask how he was holding up, to bring him coffee that was slightly less terrible than the vending machine variety. One of the night nurses, a woman named Patricia with silver streaks in her black hair and laugh lines around her eyes, had even brought Daniel a sandwich from the cafeteria when she noticed he'd gone an entire day without eating. "You can't take care of her if you don't take care of yourself," she had said, setting the sandwich on the windowsill with a firm look that suggested arguing would be futile. Daniel had eaten it, grateful for the kindness of strangers who understood what it meant to live in the liminal space of hospital waiting. Lily had been awake more in these 3 days than she had been in weeks. The medical team had adjusted her medications, trying to get her as strong as possible before the surgery, and the result was a version of his daughter that Daniel had almost forgotten existed. She smiled more. She asked for books, for her stuffed elephant that Daniel had brought from their apartment, for updates about whether the butterfly she'd seen outside her window yesterday had come back. She didn't know the specifics of what was coming. Daniel and the doctors had agreed that 8 years old was too young to fully comprehend the weight of open heart surgery, but she knew something important was happening. Something that might make her feel better. That's all she needed to know for now. On Monday evening, the night before the surgery, Daniel sat beside Lily's bed reading her favorite story for what felt like the 100th time. It was a battered paperback about a caterpillar who was afraid to become a butterfly, who thought transformation meant losing herself entirely. Lily had always loved the ending, when the caterpillar realized that change didn't erase who she was but rather revealed who she'd been meant to be all along. Tonight, reading those familiar words aloud while his daughter's eyes grew heavy with sleep, Daniel felt the metaphor cut deeper than it ever had before. Tomorrow his daughter would be transformed, broken open and rebuilt, and he could only hope that the person who emerged would still be recognizably Lily, still be the girl who laughed at bad jokes and cried during sad movies and believed that fireflies were actually tiny dragons. When she finally drifted off, her breathing evening out into the steady rhythm of sleep, Daniel closed the book and set it on the bedside table next to a plastic cup of water and a container of strawberry gelatin she'd barely touched. He stood up, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours in the uncomfortable hospital chair, and walked to the window. Seattle stretched out below him, a sprawl of lights and movement and countless lives being lived in parallel to his own. Somewhere out there, Vanessa Caldwell was probably in her penthouse or her office, making decisions that affected thousands of people, carrying the weight of her dead daughter like a stone in her chest that never got lighter, only more familiar. Somewhere out there, Richard and Catherine and Marcus were probably sleeping in beds that cost more than Daniel made in a year, their humiliation at the poker table already fading into anecdote, into a story they'd tell at future gatherings with practiced self-deprecation. And somewhere out there, Emma's grave sat in a cemetery Daniel hadn't visited in months because looking at her name carved in stone made everything feel too permanent, too final, too impossibly sad. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and let himself think about Emma, really think about her, for the first time in weeks. He'd been avoiding her memory, pushing it down beneath the immediate crisis of Lily's illness, but tonight, on the eve of a surgery that could either save or destroy what remained of his family, he couldn't keep her at bay any longer. He remembered the day they'd found out Emma was pregnant, how she'd wrapped her arms around his neck in their tiny Vegas apartment and whispered that they were going to be parents, that everything was about to change. He remembered the way she'd looked at Lily the first time the nurses placed their daughter in her arms, like she was holding the entire universe in a 6-pound bundle of blankets and impossibility. He remembered their last real conversation, the one they'd had in the kitchen of their Seattle house while Lily slept upstairs, when Emma had asked him if he was happy with the life they'd built and he'd said yes without hesitation because it was true, because he had been happy in a way that had nothing to do with money or ambition or any of the things he'd thought mattered when he was younger. What would Emma think of him now? Would she be proud that he'd fought so hard for Lily, that he'd refused to accept defeat even when defeat seemed inevitable? Or would she be disappointed that he'd let things get so desperate, that he'd allowed their daughter to suffer because he hadn't been able to provide the one thing that truly mattered? Daniel didn't know, and the not knowing was its own kind of torture. He wanted to believe that wherever Emma was, whatever came after death, if anything came at all, she was watching over them, rooting for them, sending whatever cosmic energy she could spare toward ensuring Lily survived tomorrow. But belief was a luxury he'd lost somewhere between Emma's funeral and the moment the doctor first said the words heart defect in connection with his daughter. He'd used up all his faith in the fairness of the universe, and now all he had left was stubborn determination and the fading hope that sometimes, against all odds, things could actually turn out okay. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Dr. Patel standing in the doorway, still in his white coat despite the late hour, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, mindful of Lily sleeping just a few feet away. "I wanted to check in with you before tomorrow. See if you had any last questions, any concerns we haven't addressed." Daniel walked over to him, careful to keep his voice low. "I have about 1,000 questions," he admitted, shoving his hands into his pockets because he didn't know what else to do with them. "But most of them don't have answers, do they? I can ask you about percentages and protocols and what happens if something goes wrong, but at the end of the day, I'm just going to have to trust you. Trust that you know what you're doing, that you care enough to do it right, that my daughter is more to you than just another case in a long line of cases." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "She's not just another case," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Daniel believe him. "I've been doing this for 23 years, Mr. Hayes. I've performed hundreds of surgeries on children with conditions similar to your daughter's. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that it never gets routine. Every child I operate on is someone's entire world. Every parent I talk to afterward is living through either the best or worst moment of their life. I don't take that lightly. I never have. Your daughter will have my complete focus tomorrow, and she'll have one of the best surgical teams in the country supporting her. But you're right that there are no guarantees. Medicine is as much art as science, and the human body has a way of surprising us, both positively and negatively. All I can promise you is that we will do everything in our power to bring Lily through this safely." It was the most honest answer anyone had given Daniel in days, and he found it oddly comforting. "Thank you," he said, extending his hand. Dr. Patel shook it firmly. "For everything. For being straight with me, for taking care of her. For giving us this chance." The doctor smiled slightly. "Thank you for trusting us with her. Now go get some rest. You won't be allowed in the operating room, but you'll need your strength for the waiting, and for the recovery period after. Your daughter is going to need you alert and present when she wakes up. She's going to need you to be her anchor while she heals." After Dr. Patel left, Daniel settled back into the chair beside Lily's bed. The nurse had brought him a blanket earlier, thin and scratchy but better than nothing, and he pulled it over himself as he reclined the chair as far as it would go. Sleep felt impossible, but his body had other ideas. The exhaustion of 3 days of anxiety and anticipation and emotional whiplash caught up with him all at once, and within minutes he was drifting, falling into dreams that were fragmented and strange. He dreamed of poker chips that turned into butterflies. He dreamed of Emma standing at the end of a long corridor, beckoning him forward but never getting any closer. He dreamed of Lily running through a field of wildflowers, her laughter echoing like music, her heart beating strong and steady in her chest like a drum keeping perfect time. He woke to the sound of voices and the harsh fluorescent lights being switched on. For a moment he was disoriented, unsure where he was or what was happening, but then he saw the nurses moving around Lily's bed with practiced efficiency and reality crashed back into focus. It was 5:30 in the morning. Time to prepare for surgery. One of the nurses, a young man with kind eyes and capable hands, was gently waking Lily, explaining to her in a soft voice that they were going to take her to a special room now, that she'd go to sleep for a little while, and when she woke up she'd feel much better. Lily's eyes found Daniel immediately, wide and scared, and he was at her side in an instant, taking her small hand in his. "Daddy's here," he said, keeping his voice steady even though everything inside him was screaming. "I'm right here, princess. You're going to be so brave, and when you wake up, I'll be the first person you see. I promise." "Will it hurt?" she asked, and the question broke something in Daniel's chest. "You won't feel anything during the surgery," he assured her, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "The doctors are going to make sure you're completely asleep, and you won't remember any of it. And afterward, yes, you might be sore for a little while, but they have medicine to help with that. And I'll be right there with you the whole time you're healing. We're going to get through this together, okay?" Lily nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear he was feeling magnified by the fact that she was 8 years old and didn't fully understand why any of this was necessary. The nurses began preparing her for transport, checking her for, adjusting her hospital gown, placing a small cap over her hair. Daniel walked alongside the gurney as they wheeled her out of the room and down the corridor toward the surgical wing. Other families were scattered throughout the hallways, living through their own crises and miracles, their own moments of terror and hope. Daniel saw his reflection in their faces, the desperate love of parents who would give anything, do anything, sacrifice anything to save their children. They reached the doors to the surgical suite, the point beyond which Daniel couldn't follow. A nurse with graying hair and a gentle smile crouched down beside Lily's gurney. "You're going to do great, sweetheart," she said, adjusting the blanket around Lily's shoulders. "We're going to take really good care of you. And when you wake up, you know what you're going to want? Ice cream. We have the best ice cream in the whole hospital, and I'm going to make sure you get extra sprinkles." Lily managed a small smile at that, and Daniel felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger who knew exactly what an 8-year-old needed to hear. He leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead, holding his lips there for a long moment, trying to pour every ounce of love and protection and hope into that single gesture. "I love you so much," he whispered against her skin. "More than all the stars in the sky. You're the bravest, strongest, most amazing person I know. And I'll see you soon, okay?" "Okay," Lily whispered back. "I love you too, Daddy." And then they were wheeling her through the doors, and Daniel was standing alone in the corridor, watching the love of his life disappear into a room where he couldn't protect her, couldn't hold her hand, couldn't do anything except wait and hope and pray to gods he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. The doors swung shut with a finality that echoed through his entire body, and suddenly the corridor was too bright, too loud, too empty. A nurse touched his elbow gently, guiding him toward the surgical waiting room, explaining that someone would come update him regularly, that the surgery would take several hours, that there was coffee and a television and comfortable chairs where he could try to pass the time. The waiting room was already occupied by several other families, all of them wearing the same expression of controlled panic that Daniel could feel on his own face. He found a chair in the corner, away from the television that was playing morning news no one was watching, and settled in for what he knew would be the longest 8 hours of his life. He pulled out his phone, more for something to do with his hands than out of any real desire to scroll through social media or check emails he didn't have. But when the screen lit up, he saw a text message from an unknown number. He opened it, curious, and felt his breath catch. The message was from Vanessa Caldwell. "Mr. Hayes," it read, "I hope this message finds you well. I wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you and Lily today. I've made arrangements with the hospital to ensure she receives the absolute best post-operative care available, including a private room and around-the-clock nursing staff during her recovery. You've already proven you're willing to fight for her. Now let the professionals do their part, and trust that your daughter is exactly where she needs to be. You did this. You saved her. Don't forget that. Be strong, and know that you're not alone. The message was signed simply with a V. Daniel read it 3 times, his vision blurring slightly on the 3rd pass. He hadn't expected to hear from Vanessa again, had assumed that once the money was transferred their connection would end as abruptly as it had begun. But here she was, reaching out from whatever tower or boardroom or private sanctuary she occupied, extending a hand across the chasm of their different worlds to remind him that someone was watching, someone cared, someone understood what this moment meant. He typed out a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that one too. Finally he settled on something simple. Thank you. For everything. It felt inadequate, insufficient to capture the magnitude of what she'd done for him, but it was all he had. The minutes crawled by like insects across glass. Daniel watched the clock on the wall, watched the second hand make its endless circuits, transforming seconds into minutes into hours that felt like days. Other families came and went around him. A woman with red eyes and trembling hands was called up to speak with a doctor, and Daniel watched her face crumble with either relief or devastation, he couldn't tell which from across the room. A man about Daniel's age sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs while his wife rubbed his back and whispered things Daniel couldn't hear. This was the geography of medical crisis, the landscape of people living through the moments that would define the rest of their lives, the moments where everything either broke irreparably or somehow, miraculously, held together. 2 hours into the surgery, a nurse came out to give Daniel the first update. Everything is proceeding as expected, she said with professional warmth. Dr. Patel wanted me to let you know that Lily is doing well, her vitals are stable, and they've just begun the repair work on her heart. We'll update you again in about 90 minutes. Daniel thanked her and watched her disappear back through those imposing doors, back into the world where his daughter lay open on a table, her heart stopped, her life sustained by machines and the skilled hands of people he'd only met a handful of times. He tried not to think about it too literally, tried not to picture the actual surgery with its blood and precision and terrifying intimacy. Instead he forced himself to remember Lily as she was when she was healthy, before the chest pains and shortness of breath had started stealing pieces of her childhood. He remembered her 4th birthday party in their backyard, when she'd insisted on wearing fairy wings and a tutu while demolishing a chocolate cake with her bare hands. He remembered teaching her to ride a bike, running alongside her down the sidewalk while she pedaled furiously and shouted about how she was flying. He remembered the way she used to climb into bed between him and Emma on Saturday mornings, warm and sleepy and smelling like the strawberry shampoo Emma used to wash her hair. Those memories were anchors, keeping him tethered to reality when his mind tried to spiral into worst-case scenarios and catastrophic thinking. Lily was strong. She had always been strong, even when her body was betraying her, even when pain and fear tried to overwhelm her. She was a fighter, a survivor, and she had inherited that from both her parents. From Emma, who had worked double shifts while pregnant and never once complained. From Daniel, who had rebuilt his entire life multiple times and kept standing. Their daughter was made of the same stubborn resilience, and she would survive this. She had to. The second update came at hour 4, delivered by a different nurse, this one older with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen too many of these waiting rooms to offer false comfort. She told Daniel what he needed to hear in clear, measured tones. The repair was complete. Dr. Patel had successfully corrected the defect in Lily's heart, and they were now in the process of weaning her off the bypass machine, allowing her own heart to take over the work of keeping her alive. This was the critical moment, she explained, when they would know if the repair had been successful, if Lily's heart could handle the responsibility that had been temporarily lifted from it. Daniel's throat constricted as he listened, his hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly his knuckles went white. "How long until we know?" he asked, and his voice sounded foreign to his own ears, scraped raw by hours of silence and suppressed terror. "Another hour, perhaps 90 minutes, the nurse replied. "Once her heart has been beating independently for a sustained period and her vitals remain stable, they'll begin closing. Then another hour or so for the actual closing and final checks. You're in the home stretch now, Mr. Hayes. Your daughter has been incredibly strong through all of this. Daniel wanted to ask what that meant, how a child could be strong while unconscious, whether it was her body responding well to the surgery or something less tangible, some quality of spirit that translated into medical resilience. But the nurse was already moving toward another family, another update, another moment of breaking or building hope, and Daniel was left alone again with the clock in his thoughts and the crushing weight of almost knowing. He stood up because sitting had become unbearable, his legs stiff and restless, his entire body humming with anxious energy that had nowhere to go. He paced the length of the waiting room, back and forth, ignoring the looks from other families who recognized the behavior because they'd either done it themselves or were about to. The windows looked out over Seattle, the city bathed in midday light that felt obscene in its normalcy. People down there were going to work, eating lunch, complaining about traffic, living their ordinary lives while Daniel existed in this suspended reality where time moved differently and every heartbeat felt borrowed. He pressed his palm against the glass, feeling the coolness of it, using the physical sensation to anchor himself in the present moment rather than spiraling into the infinite possibilities of what could go wrong. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text from Vanessa. Just one line this time. Still thinking of you both. Sending strength. Daniel stared at the words, surprised by how much they steadied him. He barely knew this woman, their entire relationship consisted of one hospital corridor conversation and one night at a poker table, yet somehow she had become a presence in his life, a witness to this transformation from desperation to possibility. He wondered what she was doing right now, whether she was in a meeting or working from home or perhaps standing at her own window somewhere in the city, looking out at the same sky Daniel was looking at, connected by the invisible threads of shared grief and improbable hope. He didn't respond to the text. There were no words adequate for what he wanted to say, and besides, his fingers felt clumsy and uncertain on the phone's screen. Instead he tucked it back in his pocket and resumed his pacing, counting steps to give his mind something to do besides imagine worst-case scenarios. 100 steps from the window to the coffee station. 82 steps around the perimeter of the room. 47 steps from his chair to the doors through which nurses emerged with their updates. Numbers became a meditation, a way to survive the next 90 minutes until someone would come tell him whether his daughter's heart was beating on its own, whether the surgery that had seemed impossible 3 days ago had actually worked. Time did what time does. It passed, indifferent to Daniel's suffering or hope, seconds accumulating into minutes into an hour and then beyond. Other families cycled through the waiting room, their dramas playing out in muted tones and tear-stained faces and occasional bursts of relieved laughter that made Daniel's chest ache with longing. He wanted to be one of them, the ones who got good news, the ones who walked out of this room with their worlds intact. But he'd learned over the past 2 years that wanting something didn't make it true, that the universe operated on its own logic that had nothing to do with fairness or deservingness or how hard you fought. At hour 6, Dr. Patel himself came through the doors, still in his surgical scrubs, a mask hanging loose around his neck, and Daniel's heart seized in his chest because doctors didn't usually deliver updates personally unless something had gone very right or very wrong. He stood frozen, unable to move toward the doctor or away from him, trapped in the last moment of not knowing, the last second before his life would be irrevocably changed one way or another. Dr. Patel's face was tired but calm, and as he approached Daniel, something in his expression shifted into what might have been a smile. "Mr. Hayes," he said, and his voice carried the weight of 6 hours in an operating room, of precision and pressure and the burden of holding someone's life in your hands. "Your daughter is out of surgery. The repair was successful. Her heart is beating on its own, strong and steady. We've closed her chest and she's being moved to the pediatric intensive care unit now where she'll be monitored closely for the next 24 to 48 hours. But barring any unforeseen complications, your daughter is going to recover. She's going to be okay." The words hit Daniel like a physical force, buckling his knees and sending him stumbling backward into the chair he'd abandoned an hour ago. He sat down hard, his hands covering his face, and for a long moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except exist in the space between the person he'd been 3 seconds ago and the person he was now. His daughter was going to be okay. After 2 years of watching her decline, after months of feeling powerless and terrified, after a week of living in the suspended animation of pre-surgical dread, his daughter was going to survive. She was going to live. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like drowning in reverse, like being pulled from deep water into air so pure it burned his lungs. When he finally lowered his hands and looked up at Dr. Patel, he saw that the surgeon was still standing there, patient and understanding, giving Daniel the space to process what he'd just heard. "Thank you," Daniel managed to say, and the words came out broken and wet. "Thank you for saving her. Thank you for giving her back to me. I don't know how to, I can't, there aren't words for what you've done." Dr. Patel placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, a brief gesture of connection between two men who had just shared something profound even if only one of them had been present for the actual event. "You can thank me by being there for her recovery," he said. "The next few weeks are going to be challenging. She'll be in pain, she'll be frustrated by her limitations, she'll need you to be patient and strong and present. That's how you thank me. By being the father she needs while she heals." He paused, then added, "You should be able to see her in about an hour, once we have her settled in the PICU and the anesthesia starts wearing off. A nurse will come get you." After the doctor left, Daniel sat alone in the waiting room that had been his prison for 6 hours and felt the full weight of what had just happened settle over him like a blanket. Lily was alive. She was going to be okay. The surgery he'd bet everything on, the miracle he'd fought for at a poker table against impossible odds, had actually worked. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and sent a text to Vanessa. She made it. Surgery was successful. Thank you for making this possible. Thank you for believing I was worth the test. He sent it before he could second-guess the wording, before his brain could catch up with his heart and remind him that billionaires probably didn't want emotional messages from construction workers they'd barely met. But Vanessa responded almost immediately. "I knew she would make it. I saw the fight in your eyes that night at the poker table, and I knew your daughter had to have inherited some of that strength. Congratulations, Mr. Hayes. This is just the beginning. Cherish every moment of her recovery, even the difficult ones. They're all gifts you almost didn't get." Daniel read the message 3 times, his vision blurring slightly on the last pass, and felt something shift in his understanding of this strange woman who had entered his life like a comet and changed its trajectory entirely. The hour passed in a haze. Daniel called the few people in his life who needed to know, his voice cracking as he told them the news. He called his mother, who lived 2 states away and hadn't been able to come for the surgery because of her own health issues. He called Emma's parents, who had grown distant after their daughter's death but who still loved Lily fiercely and had been quietly devastated by her illness. He called his boss at the construction site, who had been remarkably understanding about Daniel's absences over the past months. Each conversation was brief, Daniel's emotional reserves too depleted for extended discussion, but each one helped ground him in the reality of what had happened, helped make it real rather than just a dream he might wake from. When the nurse finally came to escort him to the PICU, Daniel felt his stomach clench with new anxiety. He'd been so focused on Lily surviving the surgery that he hadn't fully prepared himself for what she would look like afterward. The nurse, sensing his hesitation, gave him a reassuring smile. "She's going to look like she's been through a lot, because she has," the nurse said gently. "There will be tubes and monitors and bandages. But underneath all of that is your daughter, and she's doing beautifully. Just remember that everything you see is helping her heal. It all serves a purpose." The PICU was quieter than Daniel had expected, a hushed space where every sound felt magnified and significant. Lily's room was at the far end, a private space with glass walls that allowed the nurses to monitor her constantly while giving the family some semblance of privacy. Daniel approached slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, and then he saw her through the glass and everything else fell away. She looked so small in the hospital bed, dwarfed by machines and equipment, her chest wrapped in thick bandages, tubes emerging from her nose and arms and chest. But her face was peaceful, almost serene, and as Daniel entered the room and moved to her bedside, he could see the steady rise and fall of her breathing, the visible proof that she was alive, that her repaired heart was doing its job, that the nightmare was finally ending. He pulled a chair close to the bed and took her hand carefully, mindful of the 4 taped to the back of it. Her skin was warm, and he could feel her pulse under his fingertips, that miraculous rhythm that had almost stopped forever. "Hey princess," he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him through the anesthesia. "You did it. You were so brave, and you did so well, and I'm so proud of you. Now you just need to rest and heal and get strong again. And I'll be right here the whole time. I'm not going anywhere." The hours that followed blurred together in the way hospital time always did, minutes stretching and compressing without reason or pattern. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and adjusting medications and making notes on tablets with practiced efficiency. Dr. Patel stopped by twice, examining Lily with gentle precision and expressing satisfaction with her progress. The night nurse, Patricia, the same one who had brought Daniel a sandwich days ago, took over the evening shift and immediately began talking to Lily as if she were awake and listening. "That's right, honey," she said while adjusting in 4-line. "You keep those numbers looking good. You're doing such a great job. Your daddy is right here, and he's so proud of you." Daniel dozed in the chair, his hand never leaving Lily's, waking at every beep and alarm and whispered conversation between medical staff. He was afraid to sleep deeply, afraid that if he let his guard down completely something terrible would happen, as if his vigilance was the only thing keeping disaster at bay. Ridiculous, he knew, but rationality had little power in the PICU at 3 in the morning when you were watching your daughter fight her way back from the edge of death. It was just after dawn when Lily's eyes finally fluttered open. Daniel was awake, had been staring out the window watching the city wake up, and he almost missed the moment. But some instinct made him look back at her face, and there she was, gazing at him with confused, drugged eyes, trying to make sense of where she was and why everything hurt. He was on his feet immediately, leaning over her carefully, making sure she could see him clearly. "Hey baby," he said softly. "Hey, you're okay. You're in the hospital, and you just had your surgery. The doctors fixed your heart, and you're going to feel a lot better soon. I know you're probably sore right now, but that's normal. You're doing so good, princess. So good." Lily tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented it, and panic flashed across her face. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Don't try to talk yet," he said quickly. "You have a tube helping you breathe, but they'll take it out soon. Just squeeze my hand if you can hear me." She squeezed, weakly but definitely, and Daniel felt tears spring to his eyes. "That's perfect," he said. "That's my girl. Just rest now. I'm right here, and I'm not leaving. You're safe, and you're going to be okay." He pressed the call button for the nurse, and within seconds Patricia appeared, all business and warmth. "Well, hello there, sweetheart," she said to Lily, checking the monitors with quick, experienced glances. "Look who's awake. You gave everyone quite a workout yesterday, but you did amazing. I'm going to page the doctor, and we'll see about getting that breathing tube out so you can tell your daddy all about your dreams." Her presence was calming, authoritative in the way that came from years of shepherding patients through crises, and Daniel felt some of his tension ease knowing that Lily was in capable hands. Dr. Patel arrived within minutes, remarkable given the early hour, and Daniel wondered if he'd even left the hospital or if he made a habit of staying close when his patients were in critical recovery periods. The doctor examined Lily thoroughly, asked her to perform small tasks like wiggling her toes and squeezing his hands, assessed her responsiveness and awareness. Then he made the decision to remove the breathing tube, explaining to Lily in simple terms what would happen, how it might feel uncomfortable for just a moment but then she'd be able to breathe on her own and talk to her daddy. The process was quick and professional, and then Lily was coughing and gasping and breathing independently, and Daniel was crying openly because his daughter was breathing on her own with her newly repaired heart, and it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. "Daddy," Lily whispered, her voice hoarse and small. "It hurts." "I know, baby," Daniel said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead with infinite gentleness. "I know it does. But the nurses are going to give you medicine to help with the pain, and every day it's going to hurt a little less. You just had major surgery, and your body needs time to heal. But you're going to heal, Lily. You're going to get better and stronger, and soon you'll be able to come home and sleep in your own bed and eat real food instead of hospital jello." A tiny smile crossed Lily's face at that. "Can we get pizza?" she asked, and Daniel laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief that felt foreign after so many months of grief. "We can get all the pizza you want," he promised. "Whatever kind you want, whenever you want it." He glanced at Dr. Patel, who was watching the exchange with a satisfied expression. The doctor nodded slightly, a silent confirmation that everything was proceeding exactly as it should, that Lily was on the right path, that the worst was truly behind them. Over the next 2 days, Daniel watched his daughter transform before his eyes. The initial grogginess gave way to increasing alertness. The pain, while still present, became manageable with medication. The tubes and monitors were gradually removed one by one as Lily's body proved it could function without mechanical assistance. She began eating soft foods, complained about being bored, asked when she could see her stuffed animals and her favorite books. She was becoming herself again, the girl who had been buried under months of illness and fear, emerging like the butterfly from the story she loved so much. On the 3rd day post-surgery, Vanessa Caldwell came to visit. Daniel had texted her updates periodically, brief messages about Lily's progress, and Vanessa had responded with encouragement and what seemed like genuine interest in his daughter's recovery. But he hadn't expected her to actually show up at the hospital, to take time out of whatever important billionaire schedule she maintained to visit a child she'd never met. Yet there she was, standing in the doorway of Lily's private room, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a stuffed elephant that was nearly as large as Lily herself. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and her smile was warmer than Daniel had ever seen it. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to meet the brave girl who inspired her father to beat me at poker." Daniel stood, surprised and oddly touched by the gesture. "Vanessa, you didn't have to come all the way here." She stepped into the room, her heels clicking softly on the tile floor, and approached Lily's bed with the kind of careful grace that suggested she understood the fragility of the moment. But she looked at Lily with genuine interest, with the eyes of someone who knew what it meant to love a daughter, to fear for her life, to celebrate her survival. "Hello Lily," Vanessa said, setting the enormous elephant on the chair beside the bed. "My name is Vanessa, and I'm a friend of your father's. I heard you were very brave during your surgery, and I wanted to bring you something to keep you company while you recover." Lily's eyes widened at the sight of the elephant, and she reached for it with careful movements, mindful of her healing chest. "It's so big," she said, wonder in her voice. "Thank you." Daniel watched the interaction, his throat tight with emotion he didn't fully understand. Here was this powerful woman, this near stranger who had tested him and funded his daughter's surgery and changed their lives completely, and she was being so gentle with Lily, so present, as if this bedside visit mattered as much as any business deal or board meeting she might have scheduled. Vanessa stayed for 20 minutes, asking Lily about her favorite things, telling her stories about her own childhood that made Lily laugh despite the pain in her chest, treating her not like a sick child but like a person worthy of attention and respect. As Vanessa prepared to leave, she turned to Daniel. "Walk me out?" she asked, and it wasn't really a question. Daniel glanced at Lily, who was already engrossed in examining every detail of her new elephant, and followed Vanessa into the hallway. They walked in silence until they reached the elevator bank, and then Vanessa turned to face him, her expression serious but not unkind. "Your daughter is lovely," she said. "She has your strength. Emma would be proud of both of you." The mention of Emma's name, casual but weighted with understanding, nearly undid Daniel. "How did you?" he started, but Vanessa held up a hand. "I did some research after that night at the poker table," she admitted. "I wanted to understand who you really were, what had brought you to that moment. I hope you don't find that invasive. I needed to know that my investment was going to someone who would truly appreciate it, who would honor it. And what I learned about you, Mr. Hayes, about your life and your losses and your love for that little girl in there, convinced me that I made the right choice." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "My daughter would have been 14 this year. I think she would have liked Lily. They both have that quality of finding joy even when the world gives them every reason not to." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he simply reached out and took Vanessa's hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," he said. "For everything. For testing me, for believing in me, for giving my daughter a future. I know I'll never be able to repay you, but I want you to know that what you did, it mattered. It changed everything." Vanessa squeezed back, then released his hand. "You're welcome," she said. "And Daniel?" She waited until he met her eyes. "You've already repaid me. By fighting for her. By refusing to give up. By proving that love is stronger than impossible odds. That's all I needed to see." She stepped into the elevator and turned to face him as the doors began to close. "Take care of each other," she said. "And remember what I told you. Every moment is a gift. Even the hard ones." The doors closed, and Daniel stood alone in the corridor, feeling the weight of the past weeks settle over him in a way that was somehow lighter than it had been before. His daughter was alive. She was healing. They had a future that had seemed impossible just days ago. And he had learned something profound about the nature of strength and grace and the unexpected ways people could save each other, even across the vast chasms of different worlds and circumstances. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the doorway of their apartment watching Lily chase butterflies in the small courtyard below. Her laughter floated up through the open window, bright and unrestrained, the kind of sound he'd been afraid he might never hear again. She was running, actually running, something that would have been impossible before the surgery. Her scar had faded to a thin pink line beneath her shirt, a permanent reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything and how far they'd traveled back from that edge. The apartment was different now. Not physically, it was still the same cramped studio above the laundromat with walls that shook when the dryers ran, but it felt transformed by the presence of hope. Medical bills still arrived in the mail, though significantly fewer now that the surgery was paid for. Daniel had returned to work at the construction site, his body remembering the rhythm of labor even as his mind remained partly in those hospital corridors, replaying moments of terror and relief. His coworkers had welcomed him back with genuine warmth, asking about Lily, sharing their own stories of illness and recovery, reminding him that suffering was universal even if the specifics varied. What surprised Daniel most in the weeks following Lily's discharge was how ordinary life became again. Not ordinary in the sense of forgetting what had happened, that would be impossible, but ordinary in the daily rhythms of meals and homework and bedtimes. Lily still had follow-up appointments with Dr. Patel every 2 weeks, checkups to ensure her heart was adjusting properly to the repair, but each visit brought better news. Her stamina was improving. Her color was better. The haunted look that had lived in her eyes for months had been replaced by something lighter, more childlike, more concerned with playground politics and whether they could get a kitten than with questions about mortality and pain. Daniel had changed too, in ways both visible and hidden. He'd lost weight during those months of crisis, the kind of weight that comes from forgetting to eat and burning anxiety like fuel, but he was slowly regaining it as stress released its grip on his body. His hands were steadier now when he held his morning coffee, his sleep less fractured by nightmares of machines flattening and surgeries failing. But the biggest change was internal, something he struggled to articulate even to himself. He'd learned what it meant to be truly helpless, and then he'd learned what it meant to fight back against that helplessness with everything he had. The experience had stripped him down to essentials, revealed what mattered and what was just noise masquerading as importance. On a Saturday afternoon in early autumn, Daniel received an unexpected phone call. The number was familiar now, though he still felt a slight flutter of surprise whenever it appeared on his screen. Vanessa Caldwell had stayed in touch, not constantly but regularly, checking in on Lily's progress, sending occasional messages of encouragement. She'd even arranged for a scholarship fund to be established in Lily's name at Seattle Children's Hospital, money that would help other families facing similar crises. But she'd never called before, their communication had always been through text, and Daniel answered with curiosity mixed with concern. "Mr. Hayes," Vanessa's voice came through clear and professional. "I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend. I have a proposition for you, if you have a moment to listen." Daniel settled into the worn armchair by the window, watching Lily play below while Vanessa explained. She was opening a new community center in one of Seattle's underserved neighborhoods, a place that would offer after-school programs, job training, and resources for families struggling with medical debt and housing insecurity. She needed someone to help run the facility's management side of things, someone who understood construction and maintenance but also understood what it meant to need help, to face impossible choices, to navigate systems designed to defeat rather than support people. The job would pay significantly more than Daniel made at the construction site. It would offer benefits and stability and the chance to do work that mattered beyond just collecting a paycheck. More importantly, it would give him flexible hours that would allow him to be present for Lily's appointments and school events, to be the kind of father he'd wanted to be before crisis had consumed every available hour. Daniel listened to the offer, his mind racing through implications and possibilities, and when Vanessa finished speaking, he found himself smiling for reasons he couldn't fully explain. "Why me?" he asked. "You could hire anyone for this position. Someone with more experience, better credentials, someone who wouldn't need convincing that they're qualified." Vanessa's response came without hesitation. "Because you understand both sides of this equation," she said. "You know how to build things and fix things, but you also know what it's like to be broken yourself. You know what families need when they're drowning because you've been drowning. And you know that sometimes people just need someone to believe in them, to give them a chance to prove they're more than their circumstances suggest. That's why you, Mr. Hayes. Because you've lived the story I'm trying to help others survive." Daniel accepted the position that day, his voice thick with gratitude and disbelief that his life could shift so dramatically in such a short time. When he told Lily that evening over pizza, her favorite pepperoni with extra cheese, she'd clapped her hands with delight and asked if this meant they could finally get that kitten. Daniel had laughed and said they'd see, which in parent language meant probably yes, and Lily had thrown her arms around his neck with such enthusiasm it made his chest ache with joy. The months that followed brought a rhythm Daniel had stopped believing was possible. The new job challenged him in unexpected ways, requiring him to coordinate with contractors and community organizers, to think not just about fixing broken pipes but about building systems that supported human dignity. He worked alongside people who reminded him of himself from a year ago, desperate and determined and trying to hold their worlds together with insufficient resources and sheer willpower. He helped where he could, not just with his labor but with his story, letting them know that impossible situations sometimes became possible if you refused to stop fighting. Lily thrived in ways that seemed almost miraculous compared to her condition just months earlier. She joined her school's art club, discovered a passion for painting butterflies in colors that didn't exist in nature, brought home drawings that Daniel taped to every available surface in their apartment. She made friends easily, her illness having taught her empathy beyond her years, and other parents commented on how kind she was, how patient with younger children, how quick to notice when someone seemed sad or left out. Emma would have been so proud of the person their daughter was becoming, and Daniel felt that truth like a bittersweet ache that had softened from unbearable to simply present. On the anniversary of Lily's surgery, Daniel took her to visit Emma's grave for the first time since before the operation. He'd avoided it for months, unable to face the permanence of that headstone while uncertainty about Lily's future consumed him, but now felt like the right moment. They brought flowers, purple irises that had been Emma's favorite, and sat together in the grass while Daniel told Lily stories about her mother. Stories about how they met, how Emma used to sing off-key while cooking dinner, how she'd insisted on naming Lily after the flower because she'd been born in spring and hope should always have a name. Lily listened quietly, tracing her fingers over the engraved letters of her mother's name, and then she said something that broke Daniel's heart and healed it simultaneously. "I think Mom would be happy we're okay now," she said, her voice small but certain. "I think she's been watching us, making sure we didn't give up. And now she can rest because she knows we're going to be fine." Daniel pulled his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and whispered agreement against her hair. He believed it too, or wanted to, that wherever Emma was she could see them now, see that they'd survived the worst and come out stronger, that her daughter was alive and thriving and turning into someone remarkable. Life wasn't perfect. Medical bills still arrived occasionally, bureaucratic remnants of a crisis that felt both recent and impossibly distant. The apartment was still small, the neighborhood still loud, money still tight despite the better job. But Daniel had learned that perfection was a myth perpetuated by people who'd never faced real hardship. What mattered was that Lily was healthy, that they had a future extending beyond the next surgery date, that every morning when he woke up his daughter was breathing steadily in the bed across the room and his own heart was beating with something that felt remarkably like contentment. Sometimes Daniel thought about that night at the Meridian Club, about the moment he'd pushed all his chips forward and bet everything on a hand that could have destroyed him. He thought about Vanessa's test and her grief and the strange ways she'd chosen to honor her dead daughter by saving someone else's living one. He thought about how life turned on moments that seemed impossible until suddenly they weren't, how strength could come from the most unexpected places, how sometimes the people who looked like they had nothing left were actually the ones who had everything that mattered. He'd learned that love wasn't just an emotion but an action, a choice you made every day to keep fighting even when fighting seemed futile. He'd learned that accepting help wasn't weakness but wisdom, that pride could kill you just as surely as disease if you let it. And he'd learned that second chances existed, not because the universe was fair but because sometimes, against all logic and expectation, human beings chose to be kind to each other, chose to extend lifelines to strangers, chose to believe that every life had value worth saving. Daniel Hayes had walked into that poker game as a desperate man with nothing to lose. He'd walked out as a father with everything to live for. And now, standing in a cemetery with his daughter's hand in his, watching clouds drift across a sky that seemed impossibly blue, he understood that the real miracle wasn't the surgery or the money or even Lily's survival. The real miracle was learning that you could break completely and still somehow put yourself back together, that scars could be beautiful in their own way, that the end of one story was always the beginning of another if you had the courage to keep turning pages. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.